Well, okay, great. Well, sorry about the delay. Pleasure to be here. I wasn't sure about the format. I'm happy to give a kind of compressed lecture since we have a little bit less time. And I would love to have a dialogue, since this is also the topic of my lecture, with you and here learn a little bit more about what you're working on and how what I know can be helpful to you, because I'm not sure how much it will be helpful. I'm really a historian, a literary historian. I've come from a historical perspective, not from your much more applied present day perspective. So I somehow feel like in a dialogue, we are more likely to distill whether there's anything that I know that's useful for you. But I can give you a little bit of a survey of what I've been up to. So I have only really in the last 2 or 3 years become interested in AI. And that's really the latest version of a long-standing interest, which has to do with the history of writing and the history of dialogue. And in particular, let me just see, how can I advance? I see. So I've long been interested in historical figures, philosophers like Socrates or Aristotle or the Buddha or Confucius. And what's interested me in them is that there are founders of different philosophical schools. They are the major figures in a way in terms of world history in founding the history of East Asian philosophy in the case of Confucius, Indian philosophy in the case of the Buddha, Western philosophy in the case of Socrates, and that even though these figures lived in literate societies, that is, in societies that had writing and used writing for various purposes, none of these figures wrote a single word. They developed their particular philosophies, or really what it meant to be a philosopher, not by writing down their thoughts in a kind of treatise or a different kind of text, but by developing very distinct forms of dialogue. That's the basic, I think, point of departure for me, that the world's major traditions of thought, what we might call philosophy or religion or reflective thought, start with a practice of dialogue, a kind of distillation of dialogue, a kind of artificial creation of very specific types of dialogue. And so this is something that's long fascinated me. And so what happened when it became possible to create customized GPTs or customized chatbots, I started to work on trying to recreate these dialogic styles through various technical setups. And maybe we can talk. I don't know whether you're more interested. My guess is you're more interested in the particular use of AI we are trying to develop to replicate these dialogic styles. But I can also talk about the history of dialogue, of course. But to keep that part very short, so this is the book where I first tried to think a little bit about these dialogic philosophers. And as you can see, it also came out in Korean in a few years. So the point of departure here is we are dialogic creatures. That's how we learn language, through various signals. Sociolinguists have developed various ways of pinpointing dialogic behavior. Paul Grice is one of the figures who thinks a lot about the unspoken assumptions behind various forms of functioning dialogue. Something my team and I have been very interested in is conversational cues that keep a conversation going. The way, for example, right now you're nodding to me, that is encouraging. Nonverbal cues or verbal cues, where it's a or these kinds of cues, or various forms of echoing and mirroring, like when I say something and you sort of pick it up and repeat it a little bit and then take it further. So these are sort of that's the sort of linguistic background of all of this. As I mentioned, so that's what every human goes through. This is how we individually are inducted, if you will, into a certain practice, culturally specific to some extent, a practice of dialogue, how we learn these unspoken clues and these conversational clues, how we learn methods of turn taking, right? This is what dialogue is. It's not what's happening right now mostly, although there's a little bit of feedback that's coming in, but certain rules of turn taking, they can also be culturally specific, how long you wait for someone to pause until you answer, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of the baseline. And then as a historian and as someone who's interested in culture, I've been particularly interested in these very particular forms of dialogue that I just mentioned. So just to give you a very brief sense of what they are, so different forms of dialogue. So the Buddhist dialogue, I would say, and these are abstractions, generalizations, are asymmetrical dialogues. Most of these dialogues I study are asymmetrical dialogues. There's a question of style, the dialogic style, but really important for these philosophical figures and traditions is the purpose of these dialogues. In the case of Buddhism, kind of to reduce attachment to wrongful or harmful view. That's something that both dialogue partners share, especially when these dialogues become very, very combative, as they do in some Buddhist debating societies, especially in Tibet and to some extent in Bhutan. The Confucian dialogue, also asymmetrical, more ceremonial. The purpose here is different. It's not so much detachment from harmful views, but more a kind of cultivation, a self-cultivation, moral training. So something that revolves around ceremonial situations in particular, although later Confucian, Neo-Confucian, and you probably know this better than I do, traditions also became more argumentative as Confucian traditions confronted Buddhists and other positions and had to develop sharper rhetorical techniques for winning dialogues. In their most idealist orientation, neither Confucian nor Buddhist dialogues are really there to win, but rather for these other purposes. The Socratic dialogues, again, very asymmetrical, I would say, is more probing. It's more focused on finding contradictions, on leading to aporias, that is dead ends, that can nevertheless be productive. So I think that's sort of one contribution of the Socratic method, the productive form of a dead end, when you realize basically unmentioned or unrealized contradictions in your view. And then a fourth having to do with the sort of Jnana Sutra and a Sanskrit treatise on logic, which is more about evidence. So written at a style where there were clashing philosophical and religious schools, made it really important to develop shared logical and analytical practices, especially around trust and evidence. So those are some of the sort of philosophical school, if you look at the history of philosophy through this lens of dialogue. So that's my historical interest. And as I said, I'm not sure how useful this is for your particular purposes, which, as I understand, is to create chatbots between doctors and pediatric patients and their parents. So I'm not sure how much I have to offer here in sort of turn of the history of chatbots. So why don't I sort of go to sort of a slightly more technical lineup. And what, again, though still staying for a little longer with the historical perspective, what interests me since I started with this observation that these foundational figures, Socrates, Confucius, the Buddha, and so on and so forth, insisted on a certain practice of dialogue rather than writing, what's always interested me is how that move, that conversational style was then in these various traditions in slightly different ways, but in comparable ways, translated back into texts. So there's a very complicated process by which, let's say, the Confucian dialogues become texts, as in the Analects and the other Confucian texts. In the case of the Buddha, it took many, many generations. First, oral transmissions, gatherings of students of the Buddha, and many generations of students gathering and remembering conversations, developing conversations, and then finally writing them down. In the case of Socrates, it was one student in particular, Plato, who wrote down his conversation, probably also invented a great deal. All of these are sort of invented traditions. Into the Socratic dialogues, there's a second writer, Xenophon, much less well-known, who also wrote Socratic dialogues. And so you have, you begin with an increase as distribution, as an increase in texts in these traditions. Then you have these foundational figures who resist writing and insist on dialogues. Then you have their students who write down these dialogues into the Analects, the Buddhist sutras, the Socratic dialogues. So you could say they rechannel that resistance to writing into these texts that allow you to read dialogues and imagine that you are talking to the Buddha, to Socrates, to Confucius, although you're not really, you're just reading the dialogues. And in some sense, what I find fascinating about large language models and chat interfaces is that we can now return these texts into a conversational interface. I think this is what first attracted me to AI, that we are basically having a form of dialogue, or one could also say that we are learning a new form of dialogue with AI. And this is something that my students and I think a lot about. What existing forms of dialogue do we use in our interactions with various chatbots? So this is, I think, this dialogic view of our human AI in relations is true in general. And by our attempt to recreate some of these styles of dialogues with chatbots by creating a Socratic chatbot and so on and so forth, I think that's sort of just a test case, if you will, about how we humans are slowly being trained to learn forms of dialogue, or also, sometimes can go wrong. A lot of people, I'm sure all of you know about the ELIZA effect, a long-standing effect that it's very easy to attribute. We are primed through this dialogic training that we go through from an early age to assume that if someone chats with us, that that's a person. And so we are now in this world where we are sort of chatting with texts, where we sort of half resurrecting texts into chat interfaces. But in some sense, for me, it's just the latest turn of the screw between this very complex or very layered relationship between text and dialogue. So you have the spread of writing, you have the resistance to writing with these philosophers, you have the retextualization through the Analects, the Socratic dialogues, and so on and so forth. And then you have a kind of re-dialogization, if you will, through AI. And so just to talk a little bit about the technical aspects, and this may be very basic, that most of you may already know that. I'm not quite sure what what to expect from you in terms of technical knowledge. Most of the technology is retrieval-augmented generation. So it's about prompt templates through which you essentially create a character. So that, for me, is the first step, and it's something that it's important to visualize, that's what you do. You're creating a character. Increasingly, it's also become clear, it's one of these basic insights that's hard to put into practice, that when you're creating a dialogue between a person and a chatbot, you need to really shape both ends of the dialogue. That is, you can, in our case, we're trying to create Confucius or Socrates. On the other hand, we also have to, and it's better through prompts, to say who this chatbot is talking to. And I think that for your purposes, where you are thinking about dialogues between a doctor and a child, or a doctor and parents, to as a kind of training for doctors, as I understand it, I think it's important to think about both ends of that conversation. And then you're basically drawing on a textual corpus that you are then querying with similarity searches, semantic similarity searches, probably. I would be very interested to hear how you're shaping these chatbots in our case, since we have this sometimes very rich textual history. It's relatively easy to locate the canon of texts that we want to use, though sometimes it's difficult historically to delimit it. Do you only use the analects? Do you use other Confucian texts? Or in the Socratic dialogues, do you use all the dialogues or only some? But then, what do you do with them? How do you create a rack lineup? So basically, this is sort of one way in which we have been going through these, using sort of these additional functionalities in addition to just the semantic similarity search with style hints and follow-up questions and other techniques. Some of them are working better than others. Some of these techniques are premised on slightly older large language models, and we have felt like in the last half year or year that as the large language models have become better, that it's better to do much less with the RAG and let the large language models do much more. So I'd be curious to see whether you also using the same technique. The follow-up questions for us have been one of the, in some sense, most interesting points. And that has to do with this attempt in these philosophical contexts, maybe different or not in your medical context, to keep the conversation going, rather than what the user just interrupting or walking away from the conversation or not continuing it. So how do you make the chat exchange ongoing? And that's where we studied the particular follow-up questions these philosophers used, because they were also invested in this question. This is particularly clear in the Socratic dialogues, because Socrates always probes the assumption of whoever he's talking to, and that's not a pleasant experience. And so often his interlocutors will get angry and upset and annoyed and threaten to leave the dialogue. And then Socrates has to kind of cajole them back, to seduce them back to staying in the dialogue. And that's when we started to study some of these sort of linguistic conversational cues that are designed to keep the conversation going. And that actually a lot of these philosophical traditions are sort of premised on a particular style of follow-up questions. So very much these ongoing exchanges. The other thing that we struggled, that is probably much less of a concern for you, is to get actual quotes into the response. There's of course always there's the problem of hallucination. So we really try to always have a text corpus and force the chatbots to find a quote and to actually quote from the quote and search for a quote that's relevant, which is not always easy. So that we have spent a lot of time trying to solve that problem. And the most recent attempt has to do with using much less of a kind of a text-based RAG as the large language models got better. And instead, we've been trying to do sort of construct knowledge graphs, which are harder and much more labor intensive to generate, but are useful, especially for one experiment where we are trying to basically combine two different kinds of knowledge sources, namely, on the one hand, a philosopher like Confucius, and where we are trying to see whether Confucius could be used to give modern leadership and management advice. So a Confucian-based management advice chatbot. And so that basically forced us to combine two different knowledge sources. Initially, we basically tried it with two text-based RAGs and then combining them. But that didn't work very well, in part because of the difference in style between these ancient philosophers and modern leadership theory. And that really always created a clash. So right now that's when we started to work on a knowledge graph that basically creates a kind of conceptual map where you can put relations between different philosophers and concepts and try to bridge that with different forms of leadership and management advice. So that we are just now trying that out. But these knowledge graphs are pretty exciting, and then you can use that knowledge graph to, let me see whether I have, basically to search for relevant domains in the large language model. You can also use it to re-rank whatever the RAG returns from the similarity search and find better results. But it depends on how detailed your knowledge graph is, how deep it goes. But right now, we are finding that, again, as the large language models are becoming better, that actually you can use a knowledge graph to generate sort of concepts, and then you can send that to a large language model to dig deeper, to iterate over those concepts, and then maybe return it to a similarity search. So that would be sort of a very simple agentic lineup. So this is what we are currently sort of experimenting with, in some using less text-based lineups and more let the large language models do more, and this experiment with knowledge graph that's actually yielding pretty good results. We're also finding, and this is maybe sort of interesting, as just a kind of base cultural orientation of some large language models, not surprising, that I was just talking to a colleague who's also working on a Confucian-based knowledge graph, and she feels that DeepSeek is in its baseline Confucian, and that it returns very good Confucian results, whereas the Anthropic Claude large language model, which is actually advertised as Socratic, is very prone to a kind of Socratic style of questioning. So you could even sort these different large language models according to these sort of base philosophical dialogue styles, if you will. I don't think that was deliberately created. It's just a very kind of interesting sort of diffuse but present cultural orientation and something that's in the, the training material for these different large language models. So anyway, I mean, so this is sort of, if I were to distill in a nutshell, so this is what I've been working on. As I said, I'm not sure how that really impacts your work on these training chatbots, but I assume that some of the challenges, like keeping the conversation going, how to mobilize certain knowledge domains and knowledge sources, and how to translate that into different dialogic styles, and maybe how to implement some of these sort of sociolinguistic observations about conversation and different conversational styles, especially those designed to keep a conversation going and to feel natural. That I don't know. I would be very curious to see whether that's something that you are also struggling with. And so I feel like I should stop talking now and hear from you, just to have a sense of whether any of this is at all useful. So thanks for listening.
저희가 뭘 하는 거에 대해 어떤 사람들의 소개를 제가 충분히 못 드려서 사실 그런 게 얘기가 되고 싶지 않아 말씀하시는데 조금 이게 전달 방식이 많다는 거 궁금하신 거 있다고 해주셨어요. 컨퓨저는 공자적, 유교적, 유교적 방법이 있고 너무 재밌어. If there's any question, who's working on Chatbot?
No one. Okay.
한국어로 물어볼게요.
So fully balanced with the also the cartoon carrier, I do
한국어로
일단은 제가 주제만 조금 선택했던 것은 지금 그 앞에 서두에서 다이얼로그들의 여러 유형들이 있고, 다이얼로그 단순히 그냥 책 형식이기도 하지만은 여러 그런 논버벌적인 그런 것들도 있고, 그리고 에코노미나 이런 여러 대화의 패턴들이 좀 있다라는 서두에 있었던 것으로 좀 이해를 했습니다. 그래서 사실 제가 지금 진행하고 있는 그런 대화 기반의 그런 어떤 것들을 이제 분석을 하고 이제 환자와 의사 간의 대화에 있어서 분석을 할 때 우리가 어떤 포인트나 어떤 이제 좀 어널리시스 포인트가 있을지를 사실 이런 인사이트를 조금 여쭤보고 싶었던 개인적인 바람이 있었는데요. 혹시 이걸 좀
질문을 짧게 해주면 정말 좋을 것 같은데. So I wanted to ask her like a shorter version of the question, but it's mainly like Jie is working primarily on the LLM application on various areas of healthcare providers, or especially in hospitals. So it's some of the models working to the providers, and some of them of the models work on with the patients, and the model can generate sometimes a chatbot. Most time it's not a chatbot at all, but sometimes it's like avatar. Sometimes it's just a summary of the things that happen to patients.
Yeah. So
there's many types.
Yeah.
And her question was, it's something else. So when now we are at the time we analyze the actual dialogue between patients and the doctors.
Yeah.
So could you give me some like insights of how we can approach and analyze the dialogue between the patients and doctors before generating one for them?
Yeah. No, I think that is a good idea. So, it depends. I think so. It sounds like you have a lot of these dialogues between doctors and patients. You have records of them, right? So that seems like a very rich base from which to work. Now, I have to say, for our sort of philosophical work, we don't really use a lot of quantitative methods. We work qualitatively. The Confucian dialogues, it's a very small sample, and we analyze them philosophically and extract concepts and strategies from them. But it's probably with this kind of analysis, you want to do a quantitative analysis based on some schemes developed by sociolinguists. And so, I don't know whether you are working with particular studies, but I would probably start with a sort of as a base model with Paul Grice. He's someone who basically studies functioning dialogue, what requirements have to be met. There's a quantitative analysis, how long the answers are and that they're not too long. There's a qualitative requirement about the relevance of information. And then there is a third element that's more a kind of stylistic element, but that's sort of a very base model. And then I think the question is really, I guess, with all of these analyses, what the ultimate purpose of the analysis is. What is it? Do you want to study where the dialogue breaks down? Do you want to, what are the main pressure points? That's what I would ask probably, and then start to develop a model based on that.
So we actually in healthcare, many of us are living in the world of quantitative
Yes,
rather
right.
than qualitative measure. So there's a gap. And just for the heads up, she's the recent her project is collect the dialogue between doctors and patients in emergency department. So we have gathered the actual the dialogue of 800 cables, right? So,
That's great to have that.
yeah, and it was the purpose is to build the model to summarize
Yes.
for the purpose. But since we have all this data, then she's at the point how to view this.
Yes.
That I think they raised the question from.
Yeah. No. I mean, first of all, it's great to have that data because, as you know, it's very hard to get this data, get permission to use it. So you are in the hospital, it's your data. That's great. So
we have the team who was collecting those data. They're back there.
That's great. How did you collect it? Do you have visual? Is it just audio and transcription?
Some of them we recorded the video, but mostly it's audio. So we
Yeah.
had put this DJI mic
Yeah.
position and then the concept from each side.
Yeah.
And they working for for 3 months to do that.
Yeah. No, well, that's great. I mean, if you have some visual material, because some of the clues that sociolinguists study are also nonverbal or sort of subverbal, but some of those would be probably also in the material. So you can analyze those as well as sort of visual clues or moments when there's misunderstanding. I assume that the goal is to understand very specific forms of breakdown of dialogue in those situations. Yeah.
So another question could be from chat. Okay, how do you? There was question from the Zoom. We are.
Oh, that's right. You have.
Yeah, we have the hybrid. We have.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
So
I have a question. I've designed to help improve the argumentative skill in structured debates. Okay. Preserve the originality, ending up with generic blended voice. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, the two main tools are, on the one hand, the prompts, and you try to describe in your prompt the argumentative style that's specific to a philosopher, and then you use that was the basic approach. Then you use the text basis for additional philosopher-specific information or similarity searches. But I think this is where this comes in, where we also try to add particular themes associated with a philosopher. Now, I think we're doing that with the knowledge graph, style hints, specific follow-up questions, and that's where we also wanted to ground it in a particular quote. Now, the problem is, I think we overloaded our RAG a little bit, and it then became quite predictable, quite mechanical. The more you specify in each your return, you must include a quote, you must include a commentary on your quote, you must include a follow-up question, then it becomes very mechanical. And this is where we are now trying to exercise more restraint, do less, that the large language model do more, but direct it in the right direction, or with a simple agentic lineup where you first use a knowledge graph, then send that to the large language model, then try to continue with the output. And so that's our current approach. So I think we were actually too focused on cramming more and more philosopher-specific features into this RAG, and it became maybe Socratic or Confucian, but also very mechanical. And so we realized that it's really a balancing act, and as the large language models have gotten much better, that we could actually trust the large language model to do much more without losing the specificity, at least not much, but gaining a lot of flexibility. And that's, of course, something that you also need. Now, these conversations, as we imagine them, are much more open-ended and exploratory than what I imagine you are dealing with, which is much more focused, much more, focused on particular pieces of information to be exchanged. So a more elaborate RAG is maybe something that would work, and that it's a little bit more mechanical may not matter to you as much.
Matters. but I noticed two interesting points of your talk. If you emphasize on being too mechanical in the dialogue, and you also mentioned the previous an analysis that at some point that you need a cue among your dialogue to keep the person in the dialogue.
Yes.
And those two things is there should be a kind of power to the other person to have the will to continue this dialogue. So kind of, I feel like that is I don't know, kind of emotion.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you think those parts play parts in dialogue?
Yeah. No, it's crucial, and in some sense you need a sort of shared purpose. In some sense, I mean, that's what you have. I mean, all of these philosophical dialogues happen, and as do your dialogues within particular institutions, let's say a monastic monastery or Socratic school or a Confucian academy, or in this case a hospital, and that of course sets an institutional frame and purpose and training and different roles. All of that I think takes care of that. There is a physical element that's very strong, and that's of course a weakness of these pure chatbots, which are just exchange of texts or verbalized texts. So if you mentioned that you're also working with avatars, and I think was Safina Ali, did she come to this group? So yesterday. So her social robots, are trying to do that in a very interesting way. So that is probably where things are going. But the particular strategies used by these philosophical schools, I think are very institution and philosophy specific. So I'm not sure that they work for you. I think you need to develop your own lists of follow-up questions and cues and strategies for keeping, in this case, patients or their parents engaged, would be my guess.
I think I'm giving the next chance of being questions to Javi, who has studied for NLP before as a natural language processing before.
Okay.
Before going there, I'm giving him some time to think about it. and whenever you see a prescription, there's a note that if you have this, talk to your doctor.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be seen by a doctor or get diagnosed by a doctor or get your comfort by talking to a doctor. There's several meaning in
that's nice.
to a doctor.
That's good. What the talking means.
Yes. And throughout you shared your insight of dissecting or categorizing the converse dialogue. They gave us the insight. Oh, okay. The chatbot is not to just retrieve the data.
Yes.
It's there's several aspects.
It's an interaction.
Yeah.
No, exactly. It's not just to retrieve the data. And that's where, in the prompts, and I'm sure you're dealing with that too, it's very important not just to, identify knowledge sources and data, but also define conversational behavior. I think that's important. And another feature of conversational behavior is that the length of responses vary a lot. So it's very hard to teach chatbots to do that because it is sort of a knowledge retrieval mode, and they always want to spit out bullet points or something like that. So I mean, I think the newer chatbots have become more conversational that way, but I think that's a very useful distinction, and it's something that we realized very early on. It's not just about knowledge retrieval, it's an interaction, it's a conversation. And so that means that you have to think about both ends.
Throughout the lecture, I mean, we are learning a lot about having a new insights about the dialogue. So I gave enough time for Javi to think about.
John, I think I will make a question.
Good.
I think like if you can show like your system again, you were like leveraging basically like a RAG architecture. Like in here, like also like RAG it's basically like for retrieving and then augmenting with some LLM. And you're also like focusing on the prompts. And I guess, like, correct me if I'm wrong, you're using like APIs of really well-known models. Right?
Yes, correct.
And one of my concerns is that these models, although they're like really big, they have like a lot of capabilities to learn like about many stuff and many styles. They're also somehow like aligned, and there's like some reinforcement learning model going behind, trying to be aligned with human values. And so I'm wondering if this is a problem when you're trying to like make, for example, one of the LLMs seem like one of the philosophers who might like try to start like fighting, like more in a fighting style, then like big models that have been trained to align with human values,
Yes.
actually like filter that and say like, oh, I don't want to like fight with you or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you experienced?
Yes, we have. And I mean, for us, and this is very different for you guys, but yes, the large language models have their own conversational style built into them. And a lot of people have said that they tend to be very affirmative. That's such a great question. And, they never really fight back. And so with some, though it's interesting. So one of the very simple custom GPTs I once experimented with based on Friedrich Nietzsche, who is sort of very aggressive philosopher. And it actually, without me saying much in the prompt, automatically would be one of the few that says, that's such a, that's such a shallow question to ask, and was really sort of fighting back. And that's kind of refreshing. But yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely, I think whenever you build customized chatbots, you find yourself sort of in a tug of war with the large language model. And you realize a lot, they're also, if you're trying to create a person, they're meant to sort of forestall that. And, it's not easy to get them to say, I'm Socrates. And when you ask them, are you really Socrates, or are you just some large language model? No, I'm Socrates. It's very hard to get them to do that. Sometimes in the prompts, you have to say it like 3 times, to really drive home the point, no, you're Socrates. I mean, I'm not sure how, but I guess in your case, maybe that is also important. I don't know that a patient, or like, when you model this interaction, that it's between 2 persons, or, one synthesized doctor and a patient or something like that. But so that's one thing. Then, the conversational styles with the bullet points, sometimes you have to sort of in your actual code filter out the bullet points at the end, because it sometimes comes up with them even though you've already said in the prompt don't do it. Yes, I mean, that's how I visualize myself, that interaction. You have to constantly sort of work with and against what the large language model tends to do, and they're all a little bit different from each other, of course, and they change also over time. So it requires adjustments. No, I totally agree. Yeah.
And another question, like, since you say like sometimes you have to remind chatbots like many times in the prompt that, oh, like you have to resemble this style. Have you ever considered like doing a fine tuning of your own model so that it can actually like resemble like?
Yeah, I thought about it. I don't really have the technical capacities to do it, but it would be very interesting to see what would happen with that. Do you have experience with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, not for like styling the like chatbot, but
Yeah.
for training the chatbot like have like knowledge about some other topic or
Yeah.
like, some special task. We have done that in the lab, and I think it might enhance the quality, or in case that you want to teach him like a new style.
Yeah.
So I would definitely explore.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear.
Also, there's like something else that you can do. It's like, instead of doing, maybe I get too technical with this one, but like you can do like a full fine tuning of the model. Like
Yeah.
trying to like change the weights, all of the weights of the model.
Yeah.
Or you can use some technique that's called LoRa, which is basically like
Yeah.
some special thing that you put into the model, and you're only training this thing.
Yeah.
The cool thing about this is that you're actually adding like a really small percentage of all the weights of the model.
Yeah.
And you can train this small thing to like resemble a new style of
Yeah.
and you can plug in and plug out this thing. So I was thinking that in your use case, it might be really useful, because sometimes you might need to like resemble Confucius or some other times another philosopher. And then this thing you can plug in and plug out, and then try to simulate these different like philosophers.
No, a student of mine just earlier today had experimented with that, and I have no experience with it, but it sounds very interesting. Yeah. It's like, what does it stand for? It stands for like low
rank adapters.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's really difficult concept, but it's just this thing that you can plug in and plug out different weights so that the behavior of the model changes.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very like exploratory.
And so how have you used that specifically in your experiment?
Like, I think normally these days if you do like a fine tuning, it's better to use it this way because you're not actually changing the original model.
Yes.
The problem is that when you fine tune the model, you have a risk that it actually like forgets about tasks that you
Yeah.
So what you do is instead you train these like small things that you're putting in, so that like the model still knows what you knew before. Plus the new thing that it learns.
Yeah.
How we do it.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
So, okay, Melanie, why isn't she? Okay, we have another question from Melanie. Actually, she's on her way here.
Oh, so different responses to different chatbots. That's why. So have you? Oh, sorry, you don't see that. I guess. Oh, are you seeing that? You are reading it. Yeah. Have you noticed or observed any different impact in the same user's response? I think this is in same users' responses or part with different philosophers. So I see different responses to different philosophers. I don't see who the users are. So I have no comparison. The same person talking to different chatbots, but I definitely see different users use different chatbots. There is, I have a Montaigne chatbot that seems to be favored by men going through a midlife crisis, for example, whereas Nietzsche is being used by teenagers. None of this is super surprising, I think, in the end. But I've been struck by the variety of uses overall. Originally I created them basically just for my students who had struggled with these texts, and I thought, oh, this would be a cool way to bring sometimes these difficult ancient materials to life. But then I realized that very many people who weren't students and weren't studying these philosophers in college started using them for various reasons. So it's you put something out there and people use it in unexpected ways. I think that's sort of the cool thing about it. But yeah, that particular comparison, that would be interesting. I don't have that yet.
So when you talked about the attitude of the chatbot before, I just recalled my experience that I once ordered and put an order on ChatGPT. So I'm doing my scientific research, and could you talk to me with a sarcastic way?
Yeah.
And the response was like, "Oh yeah, you are so smart, haha." So you can actually order the chatbot to be like a sarcastic way.
But did it stick? Did it stick throughout the chat history? No, it didn't.
I just made fun with it.
That
was all. I don't think that I as you see, I thought I expect it to go back to the original attitude soon after.
Yes.
So I think we are almost. We are the past the due of the meeting, but I still want to have one more question.
If there is one.
Very, very special opportunity for us.
Okay, so thank you first of all for a wonderful lecture. So, I didn't quite get the good concept of the technical part, but I have the question about about the philosopher parts. The philosopher part, I believe, has 3 or 4 different philosopher styles of LLM talking. Amongst them, they might have a pros and cons, but which one do you think, according to the pros and cons of type of philosophers, that suits the best to the hospital and medical environments?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that.
Definitely not the competitive.
No. Which of the philosophers is the most sleep deprived? I don't know. You think about that. The one I find myself thinking about the most these days is the Buddhist project of detaching from false or harmful views. And I've been, mostly thinking about this also in a kind of political sense, how hard it is to get people to give up firmly held beliefs or ideas. And just based on my own and family members, I know that it's very true of health. People, I'm sure you all have this experience, but 10 times more than I do, of people coming with, their folk beliefs about health and remedies. And it's probably more useful to work with them, but nevertheless, the trying to instill a kind of practice of detachment from views that are actually harmful for you. That strikes me maybe in a, since it has this term harm in it, and that's something that resonates deeply with the medical profession. But I think the Buddhist example also shows how incredibly hard it is, and how much scaffolding you need, and a shared practice, and a shared project in some sense for this to even begin. So I don't know how whether there's any practical, but that's the one I guess that would come to mind. Yeah, it's a good question.
So could I finish this in Korean now?
Please.
저희가 챗봇을 공부하면서 오히려 사람 간의 대화를 다시 한번 공부하게 됐어요. 예전에 사람 간의 대화는 성격이고 그 안에 운이고 뭐 사람마다 다른. 근데 가만히 보니까 그런 게 아닌 거죠. 전에는 그럴 기회가 별로 없어서 너무 힘들었어요. 그리고 분석을 하고 공부해봤자, 그리고 반영하기도 너무 힘들었어요. 사람을 어떻게 바꿔요? 그 성격을. 근데 이제 기술이 발전해서 그걸 다시 보게 되고, 그걸 통해서 다시 챗봇이라고 하는 것들을 또 나아지게 만들 수가 있는 거죠. 이런 개념을 AI를 나아지게 하고, 그 AI를 저는 이제 그 넓은 의미에서 이런 거를 요새 공진화라고 부릅니다. 코이볼루션이라고 해요. 그래서 AI도 더 좋아지고 사람도 나아지고 서로 전 러닝하는 관계라고 봅니다. 숏 의미의 원래 코이볼루션은 AI를 잘 사용하는 사람의 진행이에요. 근데 저는 그 더 큰 의미의 그런 의미를 생각해서, 특히나 오늘은 가장 오래된, 가장 많이 연구된 코드는 랭귀지 코드입니다. 랭귀지는 사람과 사람이 서로 소통하는 코드죠. 우리가 지금 다른 코드는 사람과 머신이 소통하거나 머신과 머신이 소통하는 코드죠. 근데 역시 아까 같지만 그 백그라운드가 뭐에 따라서 되는지에 따라서 달라지는, 코드도 성격이 다 나오거든요. 그 컴퓨터 코드도. 그런 것들을 같이 한번 보는 그런 굉장히 유익한 시간이었다고 생각을 합니다. 저희 I try to sum up the lessons you gave us today. It's super interesting, and it'll take some time to resonate on everybody else. Still, I really thank you for taking your time to come down here,
listening,
and hope to have these this precious relationship with you for the future. I should have prepared 3 hours.
No, this is good. And if you have ever any thoughts, my email is easy to find. Shoot me an email about any of this. I'd love to hear from you.
First, you have to buy his book.
You do not. You can buy it from a pirated site.
네, 그럼 박수로 통해서 저희가 하죠.